Hello and welcome to this podcast on antisocial behaviour and domestic violence. I'm Andy Moore. I'm a partner in our housing team and I specialise in antisocial behaviour and leasehold work as well. And I'm delighted to be joined by Dan, who's an associate in our family team at MSB.
I am.
So thanks very much for coming today.
Pleasure.
And today what we're going to do is explore some of the links between antisocial behaviour and domestic violence and social housing. It's great to have Dan with me because you're a specialist in dealing with domestic violence. So it's fantastic to have that we've got that resource in-house as well that we can deal with that. So I think what we'll do is we'll discuss some of the definitions of domestic violence and antisocial behaviour as well. And then we'll have a look at some of the best practices really and strategies for addressing these issues for our social landlord clients.
Cool.
So in terms of what domestic violence is, Dan, what is domestic violence?
Well, it can encompass a sort of wide range of behaviour, really. Typically, what we see is things like physical abuse, emotional abuse, coercive and controlling behaviour, financial abuse. So it encompasses a wide range of behaviours, really. I mean, certainly, I think in terms of the legal definition, I have it here, which is that it's any incident or pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive or threatening behaviour, violence or abuse between those aged 16 or over who have been intimate partners or family members regardless of gender or sexuality. And then it goes on to list the types of abuse that I mentioned before. So
it's a wide definition and
yes,
there's lots that comes there. And it's interesting in terms of antisocial behaviour. That's also a broad term. So in terms of antisocial behaviour, that's various types of conduct that cause harassment, alarm, distress, nuisance to individuals as well. So when we're looking at antisocial behaviour, we can be looking at things from, graffiti on streets, dog fouling, right up to noise from neighbours. And this is really where, for a lot of the time, our clients get their first information about domestic violence in properties is from noise being heard by neighbours. And then right up to assaults, harassment of people, noisy neighbours, as I said before, and more violent incidents, cuckooing and things like that.
Yeah.
Of course, I suppose cuckooing can be issues with domestic violence if there's an intimate relationship there as well and lots of people come into the property. So in terms of domestic violence and antisocial behaviour, can you give some examples of how they may reinforce each other and how they may interplay?
I mean, I suppose the sort of behaviour that we come across are things like criminal damage, damage to property, smashed windows, damaging people's cars. That can be quite a common sort of behaviour when an individual is being targeted by a current partner or an ex-partner. So I suppose in the context of social housing, that's the sort of behaviour that's perhaps also that you would come across. So but as you said, there are other elements which can be noise, it can be arguments, fights late at night. All of that sort of behaviour is a sort of thing that that I suppose would include in the definition of antisocial behaviour.
In terms of agencies dealing with antisocial behaviour as well, have you seen instances where there can be aggression towards those agencies that are trying to help as well? Mainly, it can from victim or perpetrator, it could be.
We do. I mean, I suppose the work that I do is getting support for victims of or victims of domestic abuse or people who have experienced domestic abuse. I mean, it's not uncommon for where you have social services involved or the police physically intervening to protect one party. There can be violence perpetrated towards them, threats towards social workers, etc. That is something that comes up in practice.
So we've got domestic violence, and it could be, that wide definition of issues between two individuals or a family, and then that can spill out as well to other agencies, other individuals, and neighbours as well, which is quite clearly then becomes antisocial behaviour from that. And in terms of that interplay, would you say it's really important for social housing providers to be switched on and provide that training to their staff so they can be aware that if there is an argument in a household, that might be one of those markers that they need to be alive to. Is that an important thing for them to look at?
Absolutely. I think detection is a big part of it, and I think that landlords perhaps need to understand that a person may be in a very difficult situation. They may not be willing to come forward and seek help at that particular stage. Just because there are arguments or shouting heard in the property doesn't mean that it's necessarily antisocial behaviour in itself. It could be evidence of domestic abuse when one party needs assistance.
It's interesting you said about victims being unwilling to come forward as well, and there can be, I imagine, a range of reasons for that. I'm assuming one is that it can make things worse for them.
Yes, absolutely.
And their safety with that. And I'm sure you'll see as well in terms of that, the relationship there, and if there's elements of coercive control as well, they may not be able to see it as a problem at that point if they're in that relationship. And it might be obvious to people outside of that relationship, but I'm assuming a lot of the cases you see that things have been going on for a number of years before help is sought. In the cases that you see.
Yeah, that's true, and I think often, sadly, there are children at home as well, and what you find is social services may be working with a particular family, whether that's on a voluntary basis, family support going around to offer help to a family, or to an individual who's experiencing domestic abuse. But it takes a lot of courage, particularly when the perpetrator is still in the same property, to want to come forward with information that is potentially going to expose them to further harm. So it is a difficult balancing act, really. And I suppose I suppose from the perspective of a landlord, it's where the work with different agencies comes into it, and making sure that if there is a concern that someone is experiencing domestic abuse within a particular property, then that support agencies are notified and help can be offered to them.
I suppose as well, it's that fine line of what as well from an ASB perspective can be ordinary household noise, because sometimes people argue. I mean, that's a nature of family relationships, isn't it? That it might not always be a domestic abuse issue. It might just be ordinary household issues, or there might be issues which aren't domestic abuse issues in terms of that family themselves and how they communicate with each other, that could be addressed through referrals to various agencies. But it might not be a domestic abuse issue. It might just be that there's things that can be addressed in that family. So I think it's investigation, isn't it? That's really important on that.
It is, and I think for social landlords, it's about having policies in place to be able to identify it, and to be able to make those decisions as to when it's appropriate to intervene.
In terms of partner agencies that our clients can work with, you've mentioned social services, and you've mentioned the police as well can be involved. And I suppose it's important, isn't it, for them to build those key links with those main agencies. Are there any other agencies that can be involved in the family situation as well at all? Or
I mean, at MSB, we have a number of sort of partner agencies who we refer clients to, and that can be domestic violence support, women's refuges, and organisations that provide support in terms of parenting, etc. So there is additional help out there, and we work with these agencies to support clients who are going through a difficult situation and experiencing domestic abuse.
In terms of legal action our clients can take, and I say this from an ASB perspective, we can look at things like injunctions to stop antisocial behaviour, and it might be exclusions from people from the household, and possession proceedings, and the various grounds available in relation to possession proceedings, specifically in relation to domestic violence, although one of those is where the partner's fled and then it's effectively seeking possession against the perpetrator in there. In terms of signposting to people like yourself, What tools are available to victims of domestic violence in terms of safeguarding themselves?
Well, I suppose typically what we will consider is whether it's appropriate to seek an occupation order. If the two individuals are still living in the same property, depending on their legal rights to occupy that property, we can proceed with an application for an occupation order, which is effectively an order which regulates the occupation of the family home. It's a temporary measure, but it is a useful tool, particularly where you have a person who is refusing to leave a property, and that is therefore exposing a client to further abuse. So that's a useful tool that we have. Another and more common, perhaps, tool is obtaining a non-molestation order. It's a civil injunction. It can have the same effect in that they often have exclusionary clauses to keep the other party away from the applicant, and it will cover things, prohibitions on the other party contacting the applicant, threatening, and coming back to the ASB point, damaging property. So if, for example, we have someone who's come to us, and as part of their complaint, they are saying, well, he scratched my car or he smashed my window. As part of any application for a non-molestation order, we can include a clause which prohibits the respondent from damaging property or possessions belonging to the applicant. So there are a range of measures that we can take.
And they are applications which would have to be brought by the applicant themselves,
yes,
I'm assuming.
Yes.
And then in terms of enforcement of those orders as well, is that driven by the applicant effectively?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, an order, in particular a non-molestation order, if it is breached, it's a criminal offence. So the police will investigate that, and they will look to charge the respondent for any breach of a non-molestation order. But I mean, as you say, a breach of an order is dependent upon that particular client willing to support the prosecution and willing to have that order enforced if necessary. So a lot of it depends on their sort of willingness to do that. And I suppose one of the things that the police will look at is, for example, if an applicant has been contacting the respondent and saying, do you want to come round, knowing that may represent a breach of the order, that often will impact on whether the police are willing to take any action.
And then occupation orders, can they be obtained by non-tenants? So effectively, could you have a position where the partner of the tenant of the property could get an occupation order ousting the tenant from the property?
You can in certain circumstances. So even if they have no legal right to occupy, you can apply for an occupation order. So that is a possibility, and there are all sorts of factors that the court will consider in terms of making that particular order. But in principle, yes.
So that could, in those circumstances, that can have a large interplay with our clients' housing management functions, because then effectively they've got a non-tenant in the property, potentially with a family there as well. While the tenant is then outside the property, you've got lots for them to unpick after things like that get made. Would a landlord get contacted in relation to those applications at all, or is it made? Can they be made without notice?
They can be made without notice. It depends on the sort of seriousness of the allegations, whether it's an urgent need to protect the applicant or the child. Typically, they wouldn't, or certainly we would not serve copies on any landlord. But a copy would go to the police for enforcement purposes, so that they are aware that if they are called to attend a property and the respondent is found in the vicinity when they shouldn't be, then they are liable to be arrested. But as a sort of matter of practice, we don't send them to social landlords.
That's interesting. So the first time our client might find out about it is, one, after the event, and then two, either from their tenant saying I've been removed from the home, or from the police in a multi-agency meeting, something that, saying your tenants, just FYI, your tenants are no longer in the property. So there's a lot for them to take on board there. In terms of policies and procedures then, our clients are under a duty to have a robust antisocial behaviour policy. Would you say it's important to include elements of domestic violence within that policy as well?
I would say so, and I think setting expectations is one of the things that would be important, so that a tenant knows that if they are found to have been the perpetrator of domestic abuse, then that will have an impact on them remaining in a particular property or their right to remain there. So I do think that is important, that a policy would include specifically information relating to domestic violence.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today. Hopefully that's a good overview in relation to the interplay between antisocial behaviour and domestic violence. There's lots to be taken there in terms of, one, the definition of domestic abuse and how wide it is, and antisocial behaviour, how wide that is as well, and how the two can interplay, and just ensuring that those policy procedures are in place for social landlords and that appropriate investigations carried out, referrals are made, and that there is actions that can be taken by victims themselves in relation to that fall outside of our powers for our social landlords. So thank you very much for joining us on this today. We've got a wealth of information on our website, on LinkedIn, on Twitter as well. So please follow us on those social media networks. Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you very much for joining me today as well. Thank you.